I woke up on Christmas morning to an empty house. 17 people from my family had left in 4 cars, heading to a luxury vacation they planned behind my back. There was a group chat without me, and yet the $15,500 booking was under my name. At first, I felt the crushing weight of betrayal, the sting of being invisible in my own family. But then I realized the power was mine. With a single phone call, I could erase their perfect holiday. At 6:30 a.m., I looked at my phone, 103 missed calls. They finally remembered me. It always started the same way. My phone buzzing on the nightstand at 2 in the morning, the shrill ringtone slicing through my sleep. I didn't need to look at the caller ID. I already knew it was my mother. Her voice, thick with tears, poured into the line before I could even say hello. She told me she couldn't pay the electric bill, that the refrigerator was nearly empty, that she needed me, and like every other time, I pulled up my banking app with half-closed eyes, transferring money without asking questions. It was easier than saying no. From as far back as I can remember, I had been the adult in our family. When I was a teenager, my father drank too much, and my mother cried too often. I was the one who calmed my younger siblings, the one who cooked dinner, the one who made sure homework got done. I grew up fast because I had no choice. By the time I was 35, I wasn't just a daughter. I was their safety net, their crisis hotline, their endless supply of money and patience. I told myself it was love. That's what families did. We sacrificed. We carried each other's burdens. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was carrying all of it alone. They weren't helping me climb. They were standing on my back, and I was breaking beneath their weight. Still, I ignored the warning signs. My mother's midnight calls became a ritual. My siblings stopped asking if I wanted to join them for dinner. They asked if I could cover the bill. When I got promoted at work, they didn't congratulate me. They asked how much more I'd be making. Love in my family always had a price tag, and I was the one expected to pay it. There were moments when I felt the sting of gaslighting so sharp it made me question my own sanity. When I confronted them about the constant demands, they called me dramatic, selfish, ungrateful. "We're family," they'd say, as if that phrase alone erased every ounce of exploitation. When I hesitated to send money, guilt flooded the phone line. "After everything we've done for you, you can't help us with this one little thing?" And of course, I caved. I always caved. The emotional blackmail wore me down until I couldn't tell the difference between love and control. They told me I was cold when I pulled back, accused me of abandoning them. Yet the moment I opened my wallet, the affection returned. Sudden warmth, a flood of thank yous, as though love could be bought and sold. But the clearest red flag came months before Christmas, one I should have paid more attention to. I borrowed my brother's laptop one evening when mine crashed. He forgot to log out of his messaging app. That was when I saw it, the group chat. My stomach twisted as I scrolled through conversations between my parents, my siblings, their spouses, photos of resorts, rental cars, Airbnb links, laughter in text form, little inside jokes I wasn't part of, plans for a holiday trip, detailed down to the day and time. My name wasn't anywhere. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe they hadn't added me yet. Maybe it was just early planning. But the chat went back months. They had been discussing this vacation for a long time, and not once had anyone included me. And yet, when payment came up, I saw my name mentioned, not as a guest, but as the one who would handle the cost. They spoke of me like an account, not a person. The discovery was a gut punch, a crack in the illusion I had been clinging to for years. For the first time, I couldn't deny it. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as a resource, an ATM, a safety net, and nothing more. That night, I closed the laptop gently, as though slamming it shut would make the betrayal real. I sat in the dark, my chest tight, tears burning the corners of my eyes. For a moment, I let myself crumble. I allowed the pain to wash over me. The little girl inside me still wanted to believe. Believe my mother's tears were real. Believe my siblings loved me. Believe that I was part of something bigger than myself. But the evidence was right there, undeniable. If you were in my place, staring at proof that your entire family planned a vacation without you, what would you do? Would you confront them? Pretend you didn't see it? Or would you, like me, bury the knowledge deep inside, waiting to see just how far the betrayal would go? Because as much as it hurt, I didn't say a word, not then. I told myself it was just a trip, just a misunderstanding. But somewhere inside, a tiny spark had been lit, one that would grow, slow and steady, into a fire they would never see coming. And those midnight calls, the sobbing, the begging, the demands for money, they suddenly sounded different after that. They weren't cries for help. They were chains. And every time I gave in, every time I wired them money, I was tightening those chains around my own neck. But I didn't know then what I know now. I didn't know that Christmas would be the breaking point. I didn't know that betrayal could cut deeper than I ever imagined. And I didn't know that the same people who had used me my entire life were about to hand me the sharpest weapon I could ever wield on a silver platter. The midnight calls were only the beginning. The real storm was still ahead. Christmas Eve used to mean something to me. Warm light spilling from the tree, the scent of cinnamon in the air, the sound of laughter filling a house that felt alive. But that night, the silence was deafening. No one called to ask if I wanted to ride along. No one asked if I was ready. They were already gone. 17 people, 4 cars, a convoy, heading toward a vacation paradise that had been planned for months. And I wasn't part of it. At first, I tried to convince myself it was an accident. Maybe they thought I was too busy. Maybe they assumed I didn't want to come. But when I opened my email, the truth screamed at me in black and white. The reservation was right there. Flights, rentals, a resort package worth $15,500. My family hadn't forgotten me. They had written me in, but not as a guest, not as someone they wanted there, as the one who was expected to pay. I scrolled through every line of the confirmation, my pulse racing. The details were clinical, detached, departure times, meal plans, payment schedules. My name was the only one attached to billing. My name was the one holding the weight of this grand holiday. And the casual cruelty of it all was unbearable. They had carefully cut me out of their joy, but kept me tethered to their bills. My chest tightened. I felt a rush of heat in my face, anger so sharp it burned. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady myself, but my hands shook uncontrollably. My family had orchestrated this entire trip, whispered in group chats I wasn't a part of, laughed over jokes I'd never hear, and still, somehow, they trusted me to foot the bill. That was my role, the invisible banker, the unseen servant. And then, in the fine print at the bottom of the booking, I saw it. A clause. All modifications and cancellations must be made by the account holder listed above. My name, only my name. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My skin prickled with a cold sweat as the realization sank in. The entire vacation, every room, every meal, every luxury hinged on me. One phone call, one click, and I could erase it all. The discovery was a jolt of electricity. For the first time in years, I felt something other than helplessness. I felt power, terrifying, exhilarating power. But with that power came an ache so deep it hollowed me out. I turned off the laptop, crossed the room, and sat in front of the Christmas tree. The lights blinked softly in the dark, each flicker a cruel reminder of the holiday I wasn't meant to share. The ornaments sparkled, but all I saw was emptiness. Tears welled up, spilling onto my cheeks as I whispered to no one, "Am I really that worthless? Do they truly see me as nothing but a wallet?" The sobs came hard and unrelenting. For years, I had told myself I was part of something sacred, that family meant loyalty and love, and yet here I was, abandoned in silence while they celebrated together. I felt small, discarded, hollow. I pressed my palms to my eyes as if I could block out the truth staring back at me. But after the storm of tears, something shifted. My breathing slowed. My heartbeat steadied. A strange calm spread through me, as though the sadness had wrung itself out, leaving behind something harder, sharper. It wasn't resignation, it was resolve. I walked back to the table and opened the laptop again. This time, I didn't look at the vacation photos or the itinerary. I studied the documents. I read the fine print. I highlighted the sections that mattered: cancellation terms, refund policies, legal obligations, every clause that handed me control. And as I absorbed the details, the narrative in my head changed. I was no longer the victim sitting alone on Christmas Eve. I was the architect of what came next. I began to catalog everything. Screenshots of the group chat I had stumbled upon, copies of every bank transfer I had ever made to cover their emergencies, recordings of my mother's late-night pleas. Piece by piece, I was gathering evidence, not just for myself, but for the reckoning I felt pulsing on the horizon. For years, I had reacted. I had bent, yielded, surrendered every time they pushed. But this time, I would not react. I would act, carefully, strategically, on my terms. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the laptop washing over me, and felt a new fire settle into my chest. They thought they had written me out of Christmas, but in doing so, they had unknowingly handed me the pen, and I was ready to rewrite the story. The tears had dried, the trembling had stopped. My heart was still bruised, but it was no longer fragile. I wasn't powerless anymore. I had the weapon they had given me, and I was learning how to wield it. The night was still and silent, but inside me, something had awakened. The old Claire, the desperate daughter, the obedient sister, the silent provider, was gone. In her place was someone else, someone who was ready to stop surviving and start fighting back. And the plan was only just beginning. The morning after Christmas was quiet, too quiet. The streets outside were covered in frost, and the world seemed frozen in a moment that didn't include me. I opened my laptop again, staring at the email confirmation. Every line of it burned into my memory. My fingers hovered over the customer service number. It felt like I was holding a weapon I hadn't been trained to use. Finally, I dialed. A woman answered, cheerful and detached, her voice floating through the line. I gave her the booking number, my name. She clicked through the details, then confirmed what I already knew. I was the account holder, the sole authority. Then she added one more sentence that made my breath catch. If you cancel on the day of departure, ma'am, the entire amount is non-refundable. No one gets a cent back. The words settled in my chest like a heavy stone, then quickly transformed into something sharp and thrilling. They had tethered their entire holiday to me, blind in their arrogance, and now I held the knife. One decision from me, one moment of resolve, and their perfect Christmas getaway would collapse into ashes. I thanked the agent, ended the call, and sat in silence, my hands trembling around the phone. This wasn't just leverage, this was absolute control. For once, the balance had shifted. The chains they had wrapped around me all those years were suddenly in my hands, and I could snap them at will. Still, I knew power without strategy was dangerous. I couldn't let my anger steer me blindly. If I wanted this to mean something, if I wanted it to be more than petty revenge, I needed a plan. I needed allies. I reached out to Jessica first, my oldest friend, the one who had watched me crumble after every family betrayal, but never judged me for going back. She came over that evening, bringing a bottle of wine and her steady, unshakable presence. I showed her the emails, the chat screenshots, the booking details. She listened without interrupting, then leaned across the table. "Claire, this isn't insanity," she said firmly. "This is clarity. They've been using you your whole life. You finally see it. Now you get to decide what happens next." Her words settled into me like warm light. For the first time, I didn't feel crazy. I felt seen. The next step was more calculated. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer, sliding the thick folder of evidence across his desk. Transfers, screenshots, recorded voicemails, all the proof that my family had drained me for years. He leafed through it silently, eyebrows raised. "You've documented everything," he finally said. "Smart. If they push this too far, you're protected. Financially, legally, you're covered." Hearing those words was like breathing fresh air after years of suffocation. I wasn't defenseless anymore, but the most unexpected support came from my Aunt Margaret, my mother's sister. She was the quiet one in the family, always lingering at the edges during gatherings, rarely speaking up. I had always assumed she didn't notice much, but when I told her the truth, when I broke down and confessed what they had done, she pulled me into her arms and held me tight. "Sweetheart," she whispered against my hair, "you're not crazy. You're just too kind. And kindness in the wrong hands gets twisted into weakness. They don't deserve what you've given them." I cried into her shoulder, years of shame and doubt spilling out in a flood. For once, I wasn't alone. Someone from within the family saw me, believed me. That mattered more than I could explain. That night, as the lights of the Christmas tree blinked softly in the corner, I sat with my allies, Jessica's unwavering loyalty, my lawyer's sharp precision, Aunt Margaret's gentle strength, and I felt a new kind of stability. The silent army forming around me wasn't large, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that I wasn't powerless, that I wasn't crazy, that I had choices, but I kept one truth to myself, tucked away like a hidden blade. None of them knew that I had already made the call. I had already confirmed the terms, already decided on the timing. None of them knew that I wasn't just preparing to fight back. I was planning to strike when it would hurt the most. I leaned back, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, imagining the moment. 4 cars pulling into the resort, luggage unloaded, excitement buzzing, only to be told the entire trip had been canceled. Their laughter curdling into shock, their perfect plans unraveling in real time. Claire, the invisible daughter, the forgotten sister, the overlooked provider, would no longer be invisible. Not because I demanded to be seen, but because I would leave them with nothing else to look at but the consequences of their own cruelty. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. My allies thought I was preparing, and I was, but they didn't know the depth of it, the precision I intended. They didn't know that, for the first time in my life, I was holding the knife, and I had no intention of letting it slip. Claire realized she was holding the butcher's blade, and all that remained was the perfect moment to bring it down. The morning I had chosen was cold and pale, the kind of morning when the world feels suspended in silence. At 6:30 a.m., I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, phone in my hand. The cursor blinked beside the customer service number as if daring me to finish what I had started. My family was already on the road, 4 cars strung together like a caravan. 17 people, bound for a vacation they thought they'd stolen from me. I pressed the call button. My voice was steady when I gave the representative my name, my booking number. I'd like to cancel the entire reservation. There was a pause on the line, the faint clatter of a keyboard, and then the confirmation. Done, Ms. Anderson, no refunds. The words were final, irreversible. I set the phone down, heart pounding, and for the first time in years, I felt no weight on my chest, only air. Hours later, the storm began. My phone lit up, vibrating with a fury that didn't stop. 17 people discovering all at once that their luxury holiday had dissolved into nothing. The first call came from my mother, then my brother, then my sister-in-law. The screen filled with names stacked on top of one another until the number of missed calls flashed in the triple digits. 103. I let them ring. I sat on my couch, staring at the silent tree lights, and let every vibration echo like a drumbeat of justice. The voicemails came next. At first, the voices were frantic, desperate, bargaining. Claire, please, this must be a mistake. Call us back. Then they turned sharp, accusing. You selfish little brat. How could you ruin Christmas for everyone? By the 10th message, the tone shifted again, collapsing into tears. Please, Claire, think of the children. Don't do this. But it was one particular voice message that made me pause. It was my younger sister, the one I had practically raised when my parents were too broken to do it themselves. Her voice was small, trembling. Claire, I didn't want this. I told them not to leave you out. I wanted you there. I'm sorry. For the first time since the storm began, I felt my resolve flicker. Was she telling the truth? Or was this just another layer of manipulation, another rope thrown out to pull me back into the pit I had finally climbed out of? My hand hovered over the phone, torn between deleting the message and pressing play again. But before I could decide, the fire shifted online. One cousin, always impulsive, always reckless, posted about it on Facebook. A rant about how I had ruined everything, how I was cruel, heartless, vindictive. He named me outright, airing the family feud to the public. What he didn't expect was the reaction. The comments came fast, dozens at first, then hundreds. Strangers rallying behind me, piecing together the fragments of the story I had never told. So let me get this straight. They excluded her from the trip but expected her to pay? Good for her. That's not revenge, that's survival. You don't abandon someone and then demand their money. Within hours, the tide turned completely. My family was being dragged through the mud, their names mocked, their behavior condemned. What was supposed to shame me instead backfired spectacularly, casting them as villains and me as the unlikely hero of a story that struck a nerve with thousands. Inside their group chat, I could only imagine the chaos. Fingers pointing, voices raised, alliances crumbling. The blame game had begun. Who had leaked the information? Who had counted on me to pay? Who had excluded me from the planning? One by one, they turned on each other, their carefully curated facade of unity collapsing in real time. And me? I sat quietly, sipping coffee, scrolling through the comments. For once, the world wasn't laughing at me. It was standing beside me. But let me ask you this. If the people who had hurt you, ignored you, drained you, suddenly turned back, with tears in their eyes and apologies in their mouths, would you forgive them? Or would you watch as the empire they built on your back burned down to ashes? I thought I had seen the worst of it. I thought the betrayal of Christmas, the 103 missed calls, the online implosion, that was the climax. But I was wrong, because hidden beneath the wreckage of that ruined trip was a secret that would cut deeper than everything else combined. And when I uncovered it, the blade would slice through whatever fragments of loyalty I still had left. The days after the canceled trip unfolded like watching a house burn from a safe distance. I didn't need to lift a finger. The fire spread on its own. My family's humiliation echoed through every corner of their world. At church, whispers followed them like shadows. Can you believe what they did to Claire? One woman muttered loudly enough for my mother to hear. At my brother's office, colleagues stopped him in the hallway, with raised eyebrows asking if the rumors were true. Even the kids, innocent as they were, repeated what they overheard at school, that their family had been greedy, cruel, and careless. It wasn't just the online world tearing them apart. It was their own community, the people whose approval they had always prized above everything. The mask of respectability they wore for years had cracked, and now everyone could see the rot underneath. Still, I stayed silent. I didn't post rebuttals or explanations. I didn't call them out by name. I simply let the story breathe. And in that silence, their guilt screamed louder than I ever could. One evening, while sifting through old emails to gather financial records, I stumbled across something I hadn't expected. A chain of messages between my parents and two of my siblings, dated months before the Christmas trip. At first, I thought it was more planning chatter, but the subject line caught my eye. Future assets. My heart dropped as I opened the thread. The words blurred before me, each sentence like a strike across the chest. They weren't just plotting vacations without me. They were discussing their wills, and in cold, clinical language, they had agreed I would not be included. Claire has no children, one line read. She doesn't need the inheritance. She already makes more money than us. Another, she'll understand. She's independent. But what stung worst of all was the unspoken truth, that they had already written me off. Not just as family, but as blood. It was betrayal on a different scale, deeper and crueler than the canceled vacation. They hadn't just excluded me from a trip, they had erased me from their future. For years, I had sacrificed to keep them afloat, Late-night transfers, paid bills, silent rescues, and the reward, erasure. They wanted my money, my loyalty, my silence. But when it came to legacy, to permanence, they cast me aside like I had never existed. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of that realization pressing hard on my chest. My family hadn't just used me, they had planned to discard me. And yet, as painful as it was, I couldn't help but feel the scales tipping. They had excluded me from their inheritance, but now I held something far greater: power. Not the kind written into wills or measured in property lines, but the kind forged in fire and betrayal. Power that came from walking away, from refusing to be chained any longer. For the first time, I wasn't the one stripped bare. They were, and I held the mirror up for them to see it. But now the tables had truly turned. I closed the email thread, printed the documents, and slid them into my growing file. Another piece of evidence, another stone on the mountain I had built quietly, piece by piece. The calls from my family slowed after the online backlash reached full force. Their voices had gone from screaming to pleading, from accusing to begging. But I didn't answer, not once. Instead, I turned to my journal, filling page after page with words I hadn't dared to say out loud. For years, my journal had been a place of despair, entries filled with self-doubt, guilt, fear. But now my words were different. They carried weight, authority, calm. I am not their servant, I wrote one night. I am not their safety net. I am not invisible. As I closed the notebook, I noticed something strange. For the first time in decades, my chest felt light. Not empty, not broken, light. The burden that had clung to me like a shadow was gone. Sitting in the quiet, with nothing but the hum of the heater and the glow of a single lamp, I realized I didn't need to scream for justice. I didn't need to orchestrate their downfall. They were already unraveling, undone by their own greed, their own lies. I just had to stay silent, steady, and let karma do the rest. And yet, deep inside, I knew justice wasn't only about revenge. It wasn't only about watching them fall. Real justice meant something more, something that reached beyond the fire of payback and into the heart of healing. I didn't know what that would look like yet, but I knew this much. My journey wasn't finished. The collapse of my family's empire was only the beginning. The real reckoning, the one that would free me completely, was still to come. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of abandonment, the kind that used to press against my chest when my family forgot me. This silence was chosen, deliberate, clean. I had blocked the group chat. I had changed my number. One by one, the doors that once tethered me to their demands slammed shut, and for the first time, I felt no guilt in locking them. The world didn't collapse when I stepped away. My life didn't crumble without their voices tugging at me in the middle of the night. Instead, it expanded. Mornings were suddenly mine alone. Evenings were no longer consumed by crisis calls. The space they left behind wasn't empty. It was fertile, waiting to be filled with something new. Still, not every message disappeared. A few slipped through the cracks, letters, emails, even an unexpected knock at my door. Cousins I barely spoke to before, distant relatives who had once joined the chorus of demands, now reached out differently. Their words were halting, clumsy, but they carried sincerity. "I'm sorry," one message read. "I didn't realize how much you carried for us. I should have spoken up." It would have been easy to fall into their arms, to believe that maybe, Some of them finally understood, but understanding doesn't erase damage. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. So I answered carefully, politely, but kept the walls firm. Boundaries, I was learning, weren't a punishment. They were a declaration of self-respect. One evening, after weeks of peace, I wrapped myself in a coat and stepped outside. Snow drifted down, soft and silent, blanketing the world in white. I walked slowly, my boots crunching against the fresh powder, and let the air fill my lungs. For the first time, Christmas didn't sting. For the first time, I didn't feel the ghost of exclusion. I felt free. A smile crept across my face, unforced and genuine, as I realized how quiet joy could be. Freedom wasn't loud, it was steady, and it was mine. But as I learned to embrace solitude, I also discovered I wasn't alone. My friends began to circle closer, filling the gaps my family had left behind. Jessica invited me to dinners, not because she needed something, but because she wanted my company. My coworkers started including me in small gatherings, where laughter came without strings attached. Even my Aunt Margaret, the quiet ally, began calling just to check in. No requests hidden beneath her words. Piece by piece, a new circle formed around me. Not by blood, but by choice. A chosen family, bound not by obligation, but by love freely given and freely received. It was Jessica who convinced me to share my story online. "People need to hear this," she said. "You don't know how many are living through the same thing." Hesitant at first, I wrote a post, just a few paragraphs about what had happened, the trip, the exclusion, the 1-3 missed calls. I didn't name names, didn't spill venom. I simply told the truth. I didn't expect the response. Within hours, thousands of people commented, shared, reached out. Messages poured in from strangers across the world. "This is my story too. You put into words what I never could. Thank you for reminding me I'm not crazy." The flood was overwhelming, but it was also healing. I wasn't just a victim. I wasn't just surviving. I was part of something bigger. A collective awakening of people who had lived under the weight of toxic families and finally found the courage to step out. In their words, I found strength. In their solidarity, I found purpose. My pain had transformed into something that mattered, something that inspired others to reclaim their own freedom. As the snow continued to fall that winter, I understood what I had truly canceled. It wasn't just a vacation. It wasn't just their Christmas plans. I had canceled their control over me, their ability to dictate my worth, their power to define my place in the family. They ditched me for Christmas, I wrote in my journal one final time. But I canceled more than a trip. I canceled the hold they had over my life. And with that, the story of my past closed. Ahead of me stretched a future that was finally mine to write. Free, unburdened, and full of possibilities.